Hi friends, Tracy here to tell you that making a podcast is hard work. There's research, scripts, editing, and all of that can mean a million decisions. Fortunately for me, my choice in a podcast hosting platform was easy because I decided upon Anchor by Spotify. If you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place. Let me explain. Anchor has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. When hosting on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast, and more. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. And best of all, Anchor is totally free. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started on your podcast today. Welcome to Crescent City Crime, dear listeners. I'm Tracy.
And I'm Brian.
And thank you for listening to us so much. We really appreciate your support. We've had yet another influx of listeners, so welcome.
Thank you for joining us.
And the thing I'm most excited about is for the first time, we've broken into the 18 to 20-something-year-old demographic.
Welcome aboard.
Yes, younglings, welcome aboard. But I do need to point out that a lot of this influx is due to Lucy, who manages our social media. So thank you so much, Lucy, for your work.
Thank you, Lucy.
Yes. Well, dear listeners, Pride Month is upon us. So this month, we're going to do something to do with Pride every episode. We're going to, after this episode, next week, we're going to go into the history of the protections that the queer community does have in the state of Louisiana, what they don't have. And we're also going to talk about how we got there today. And the week after that, we are going to talk about possibly one of the biggest tragedies, possibly the biggest tragedy in the gay community in New Orleans, which was the upstairs lounge fire. And for Coffee Talk, I want to highlight a member, a lesbian who lives here in New Orleans, who's had a very long history of living in the city. She saw a lot of change, and she ran for office at one point. But for today, we're going to delve into Clay Shaw. And Brian, tell the... So Brian, tell the people who Clay Shaw was and why he is so important.
Well, Clay Shaw's historical significance is mainly the fact that he was the only person to ever go to criminal trial involving the John F. Kennedy assassination.
That's very true. I didn't think of it that way.
Considering there was a JFK movie done and talk of a variety of conspiracy theories involving this, laced with historical information through a variety of talk show hosts over the last several decades. You would think there would have been more than one person brought to trial, considering all the time spent on JFK assassination, but no, only one defendant, and he was not found guilty.
And since we do have an influx of new listeners, younger listeners, who might not be familiar with the John F. Kennedy assassination, here's a brief overview. On 11/22/63 in Dallas, Texas, then President John F. Kennedy and his wife, Jackie Kennedy, were in a convertible. Was it convertible? What kind of car was it?
Not sure. I do know it was a convertible.
So it was a convertible. There was no top on it. And as they passed by
I'm not going to go over the conspiracy theories because there are so many, and that's not what today's episode is about. But the official story is that Lee Harvey Oswald was in the 5th floor of the Texas Book Depository and shot him, was it twice in the head?
Supposedly.
Yes, twice in the head. And I also want to mention that we've been to the Kennedy Museum before. We did go to the book depository, and we saw the spot on the street where Kennedy was shot. There are X's on the ground that
for every shot represent every shot
fired. Yes.
Yes. And you can go to the spot where Lee Harvey Oswald supposedly fired these shots.
Yes.
And you can, take your own sniper's view down and look at the cars moving, although this was a slow moving vehicle.
Yes, it was, because he was waving to everybody and everybody was waving to him. Yes. Well, almost everybody.
And look at the size of human heads from that range.
Right.
And wonder about whether or not this could have been done with an Italian Carcano bolt-action rifle with a low-power, cheap Japanese scope.
Well, we will get more into this at a certain point because Lee Harvey Oswald has his own ties to New Orleans.
Yes. Oh, so yes.
We will be discussing him probably in November, actually, around the anniversary of the JFK assassination.
Yeah, I can't wait because I have a few things in common with Lee Harvey Oswald.
I know.
We'll get into that in November.
We will get there. We will get there. But for now, we're discussing Clay Shaw, and Clay Shaw was a gay man, which is it is a possibility why there was an attempt to prosecute him for you can say conspiracy, right? Oh, he really was a part of it, but he was found, but he wasn't found guilty of anything. Myself personally, I don't think he has anything to do with it.
Well, it was very, very sketchy.
It is.
There was a very thin line connecting Clay Shaw to this, and it seems like the cover up was so extensive that it seemed to be all Garrison can get was him being connected with people who.
Don't give it away. I gotta still tell the story. Yeah, come on.
Right, but as far as his activity in the gay community at the time, he had an alias.
Yes.
In the gay community, and consider that's a time when
a lot of gay people had aliases,
right?
Because even if they were married and had a family, they were still gay, and they did not want to be outed, so they were closeted, but not closeted to other gay people.
So pretty much mainstream society back then considered any member of the gay community to be potentially nefarious in nature.
Right.
So needless to say, that didn't help Clay Shaw out in the eyes of
everybody, of polite society.
Yeah, and prosecutors.
But who was Clay Shaw? This is who he was. He was a native of Kentwood, Louisiana. His parents were Gladys Lenora Shaw, who was a United States Marshal, and his mother was named Alice. Clay's grandfather had been the sheriff of Tangipahoa Parish, and Tangipahoa Parish is just a little bit past Baton Rouge, for those of you who do not know. When Shaw was 5, his family moved to New Orleans, and he eventually graduated from Warren Easton High School,
which is located on Canal Street,
not far from where we live.
Yeah, go around Canal, around the intersection of Canal and Broad Street, and about maybe a quarter to half mile from the French Quarter.
Yeah, my aunt went there.
Yeah.
Now, after high school, Shaw served as an officer in the United States Army during World War II. He served as secretary to the general staff and later served in Europe. He was decorated by 3 nations, the United States with the Legion of Merit and the Bronze Star, and he was also awarded medals from the countries of France and Belgium. He was honorably discharged from the United States Army as a major in 1946.
Now, the awards he received from France
and Belgium.
Well, the award he received from France is a unit award.
Okay,
is that every one of his units was given that. A certain Marine Corps unit was also given the same award. Essentially, if your unit fought to liberate France in World War II, you were given that award, the coup de grace, I believe it's called.
Oh, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
You would know more than I would.
I don't recall which Marine Corps unit exactly, but there is a Marine Corps unit that gets to wear it to this day.
Wow.
Because of that.
So was that kind of like when you were in Desert Storm, you got
Kuwait
medals.
Liberation Medal, which was given to every one of my units. Everyone who entered Kuwait received the Kuwait Liberation Medal, for example. It's a foreign award.
Right.
Which means it's worn.
No, it's a major award.
Well, foreign awards are worn on your uniform after awards given by your country or your service branch.
Gotcha. Okay, well, after World War II, Clay Shaw helped start the International Trade Mart in New Orleans, which facilitated the sales of both domestic and imported goods. He was known locally for his efforts to preserve buildings in New Orleans' historic French Quarter, so he stayed very busy. Even after the Army, he did not stop. He kept going. And he really did. He actually had, beyond this, he had an impact in New Orleans' history. I mean, he helped start the International Trade Mart, which is a big deal.
Yeah, yes, it is.
And fighting for historical preservation for the French Quarter buildings, what a lot of people might not realize is that the city is 300 years old. Some of those buildings are about that old. Some of them are just a little bit younger than 300 years old. But there's always been pressure from greedy developers and that sort of thing to try to change the beautiful facade of the French Quarter. So for people like Clay Shaw to try to start to fight for that even way back then, that's a big deal.
Yes, yeah, and there were others who built upon his early efforts there.
Yes. Now, Clay Shaw was also a published playwright. The best known of his works is called Submerged. It was written in 1929 by Clay Shaw and H. Stuart Cotman, who were both still high school students. So he's very bright young man. I'm not saying he was never stupid, but even at that time, from that young age, he was ambitious.
Yeah, and talented.
Yes. Very talented, yes. Now, as we mentioned before, in 1963, then President John F. Kennedy was assassinated at Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas. And in the aftermath, the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy, which was known unofficially as the Warren Commission, was established by President Lyndon B. Johnson, who was JFK's vice president. And in fact, there is a very famous photo of him being sworn in as president on the plane on Air Force One, standing next to Jackie Kennedy.
Yes. Now, just a quick thing about Air Force One. Keep in mind, Air Force One is a call sign,
right,
for whichever aircraft is carrying the President of the United States. Air Force Two is the call sign for whichever aircraft is carrying the Vice President of the United States.
And the movie with Harrison Ford was completely accurate.
Yes, including the presidential escape pod.
Yes.
Which was a total ripoff from the movie Escape from New York.
We're joking. There's not actually a presidential escape pod, folks. Don't believe us.
Just like there wasn't one in the movie Escape from New York, but it's identical. It looks identical to the one from Escape from New York. So it was a total movie ripoff, But
right,
or maybe one of the producers saw it as a homage to Escape from New York, maybe. but let's go ahead.
So Lyndon Johnson established the Warren Commission through the Executive Order 11130 on November the 29th, 1963. So that was just 6 days, or less than about a week after the assassination. The report concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald was not part of any conspiracy, domestic or foreign, to assassinate President Kennedy. Now, it's no secret that many people do not accept the conclusions of that report, and former New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison was one of those people. In late 1966, Garrison began an investigation into the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. He took it upon himself to do this. He received several tips that a man named David Ferry may have been involved in the assassination. In 1967, Garrison was able to find out that David Ferry was really Clay Shaw, aliases that we talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, my mistake. Clay Shaw was not David Ferry. David Ferry was a separate guy, but Clay Shaw did use an alias. But Garrison charged Clay Shaw, David Ferry, and Guy Bannister for conspiracy with elements of the Central Intelligence Agency in the John F. Kennedy assassination. That's a mouthful. Garrison believed that Shaw was the man named Clay Bertrand in the Warren Commission report. And Garrison also said that Shaw used the alias Clay Bertrand in New Orleans Gay Society. So there we go. That was his alias, Clay Bertrand.
Yeah.
Okay. Garrison linked Lee Harvey Oswald to a man named David Ferry. David Ferry was a morally questionable pilot. And I would actually like to do a future episode on this guy. So Ferry eventually moved to New Orleans and transferred to the New Orleans Cadet Squadron at Lakefront Airport. You know what that is.
Civil Air Patrol.
Civil Air Patrol.
Yeah.
There he served as an instructor and later as the commander. However, after a ferry-trained cadet pilot perished in a December 1954 crash, Ferry's annual reappointment was declined. He was asked to be a guest aerospace education instructor at a smaller squadron at Moisant?
Moisant.
Okay, Moisant Airport, and lectured there from June to September 1955. On July 27, 1955, 15-year-old Lee Harvey Oswald joined the squadron. The two were photographed together at a Civil Air Patrol event, and the photograph was how Jim Garrison linked Clay Shaw to David Ferry and Lee Harvey Oswald, since David Ferry knew Clay Shaw. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like he was trying to connect dots that might not have been there.
Yeah.
Simply being photographed with somebody. Like if I would have been photographed with, I don't know, Charles Manson at some point in my life, which is not possible because for many reasons.
Right. Or let's say someone photographed of Charles Manson while he was trying to put his music career together.
Yeah.
That fails.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Trying to link that person with the murders would likely be erroneous.
Exactly.
Okay. Just like you can't really link me to Oswald, even though we were, I was a member of the same cadet squadron 2 decades later.
We all know that you're in on it.
Well, I consorted with a former U.S. president while in that cadet squadron.
Did you now?
Yes, and that's a possible connection right there. No, what that was former President Gerald Ford landing at the airport. And when the Secret Service arrived ahead of the visit to scout the airport out, they saw us having the meeting and came up with the idea of how about we provide an honor guard for the former president, and we did.
Oh, that's cool.
And
okay.
He briefly spoke. Gerald Ford briefly spoke to us. Yeah, we were quite a surprise for him. He kept saying congratulations to us, and then he went on to say, "Well, congratulations on what you're doing here. It's important and all that stuff."
Is that when he tripped down the stairs of Air Force One, or was that a different time?
That was definitely a different time. That was when he was president.
Okay.
When Chevy Chase on Saturday Night Live would portray him, and every week Chevy Chase would, of course, trip.
Right. Okay. On March the 1st, 1967, Clay Shaw was arrested on conspiracy charges. During the following 2 years before the trial would take place, Clay Shaw and Jim Garrison dominated the headlines of New Orleans newspapers, which led to the national coverage of the trial of Clay Shaw. Of course, by this point, Lee Harvey Oswald had been dead for a few years, but David Ferrie died in 1967, just a few months after the arrest of Clay Shaw. Jim Garrison also believed that Clay Shaw was the unidentified Clay Bertrand who had phoned a New Orleans attorney requesting that the attorney represent Oswald the day after the assassination. According to Garrison, Clay Bertrand was an alias that Clay Shaw used in New Orleans' gay society, and throughout his investigation, Jim Garrison exploited Shaw's sexuality and private life. So there is that. It sounds like a witch hunt.
That's typical of prosecutors and law enforcement of the time, for sure.
Yeah.
And even for a period of time after that, of course.
Well, it also sounds like Jim Garrison probably had an overinflated self-importance, because on January 31st, 1969, the trial began. Now, before the trial officially started, Jim Garrison gave a 42-minute speech before the judge and jury, presenting his theory that dealt with the conspiracy charges. 42 minutes. They had to listen to this guy bloviate.
Wow.
Garrison claimed that the plot to kill JFK was hatched between Lee Harvey Oswald, David Ferrie, and Clay Shaw when Oswald was in Louisiana. Garrison believed that Clay Shaw was known as Clay Bertrand to the other men. Garrison noted that Clay Shaw had flown to the West Coast on November the 15th, 1963, where he remained until after the shooting, thereby establishing an alibi for himself. Feels like a reach. Following the assassination, FBI agents undertook a systematic and thorough search for Clay Bertrand in New Orleans, but were unsuccessful. So it feels like Jim Garrison was also fame hungry. That's what it feels like to me. He was really trying to make a name for himself, and he was going after this guy, just grasping at straws.
Yeah, he became desperate at one point.
Yeah.
When he wasn't able to find who he thought he was going to find.
Yes.
And then he became desperate when even after he zeroed in on the wrong person.
Garrison claimed that he would produce conclusive evidence that the person that law enforcement should have been looking for was Clay Shaw. And something to note is that Garrison was able to subpoena the Zapruder film from Life magazine. And again, for those who don't know, the Zapruder film is that infamous footage of JFK being assassinated. It's the footage where you see him waving and smiling as they turn the corner. And then you just see his head or his body kind of going back and forth. And you see Jackie Kennedy trying to scramble out the back of the car, and a Secret Service agent is pushing her down to keep her safe. It's very, very harrowing footage to watch when you think about what's really going on there.
Yeah, it also looks, the footage looks rough too.
Well,
by today's standards, especially.
Well, also think about this. It was 1963, and not many people had handheld cameras. So it is, I mean, it's going to look like 1963 footage.
Yes.
Now, the jury for the Clay Shaw trial were the first members of the American public to view the footage. So think about that. You and me have seen it a few times, but this is the first time members of the American public were able to see that.
I think it was during the 90s.
That it was officially released?
When it was released to the general public.
Oh, okay. Huh. Well, during that time, bootleg copies were made by Steve Jaffe, an investigator who worked with Garrison, and this led to the film's wider distribution. Now, it may not have been publicly released on the evening news, but this film, or the Zapruder footage, was distributed a little bit more widely because of bootleg copies. Garrison's key witness against Clay Shaw was Perry Russo, a 25-year-old insurance salesman from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Now, here's where it gets weird. According to the first interview between Assistant District Attorney Andrew Sciambra and Russo told him that he met Clay Shaw twice, but neither time was at a party, and this interview was recorded. During the actual trial, it was known that Russo testified under the influence of sodium pentothal, sometimes known as truth serum, and he was also put under hypnosis. In his trial testimony, Russo said that he had attended a party at an anti-Castro activist apartment, and that activist was David Ferry. So, Brian, have you ever heard of anybody being put under this alleged truth serum and hypnosis to get a testimony out of them?
Never.
I've never heard of that either.
It's the first time I've heard of that.
Yeah. So at the party, Russo said that Lee Harvey Oswald, and Russo said that he was introduced to him as Leon Oswald. David Ferry and Clem Bertrand, who Russo identified in the courtroom as Clay Shaw, had discussed killing President Kennedy. The conversation included plans for the triangulation of crossfire and alibis for the participants. So now this is an alleged conversation, okay?
Mm-hmm.
This is not something that was ever proven by more than, or well, it was never proven, but this was also this alleged evidence, because it's not really evidence, it's a conversation. You have the right to talk about anything you want to in this country. It's if you actually do certain things that you can get in trouble.
Well, federal conspiracy laws pretty much dictate that if you say something in front of something to this effect in front of the wrong person, then you can be brought up on a federal conspiracy charge.
You can be.
But it really depends upon who you're talking in front of, and if it's simply one witness who is not a federal agent,
right,
then you might not be able to prove such a thing.
And then also, Garrison claims that Russo had already discussed the party at Ferry's apartment before any truth serum was administered, and Scambria said that the notes from that initial interview between Scambria and Russo had left out that particular piece of information. So what does this sound like to you?
Sounds like a district attorney and a witness both trying to gain notoriety.
Mm-hmm. Throughout the rest of his life, Russo reiterated the same account of being present for a party at Ferry's house, along with Mr. Bertrand, where the subject of Kennedy's potential assassination had come up. And Jim Garrison defended his conduct regarding witness testimony, stating, "Before we introduced the testimony of our witnesses, we made them undergo independent verifying tests, including polygraph examination, truth serum, and hypnosis. We thought this would be hailed as an unprecedented step in jurisprudence. Instead, the press turned around and hinted that we had drugged our witnesses or given them post-hypnotic suggestions to testify falsely." Now, I do want to point out that post-hypnotic suggestions and hypnotism don't necessarily work the way that people think that they do. Hypnotism can work, but a post-hypnotic suggestion is kind of like a keyword or an action that's kind of, I think it's more like to prevent you. It's to help your brain go into a different direction. it's not like being put under and you're trying to recover suppressed memories, which don't really happen either, by the way. That's been more or less disproven by the scientific community at large, that it doesn't work in the way that you see it portrayed in movies. And also sodium pentothal doesn't work how people believe it does either. There's no such thing as a truth serum.
It's a relaxant, right?
I believe it is, but it's not going to have you just blurt out the truth. Some deep dark secret that you're hiding is not just going to come out because of this. You know what I'm saying?
It just makes you less likely to. One way of putting it is it weakens your mental defenses, but you're not necessarily going to simply tell an interrogator everything you know just because of that, just because you're under the influence of it.
Right. And also polygraph examinations are largely bunk too. They can determine if you're lying about something or not, but the polygraph machine can be fooled.
It mainly establishes a pattern.
It establishes a pattern, and these polygraph examinations they've never been, well, I don't know about never, but they've not been admissible in court for a very long time.
Now, an employer, if you consent to it, of course, an employer can use a polygraph as part of a pre-interview.
Well, that's a little bit different than trying to put somebody in court over something you said or didn't say on a polygraph.
Like, for example, I'm not sure if the New Orleans Police Department still does it, but even to join the New Orleans Police Department Reserve Division, you have to take a polygraph.
Or you had to. You don't know about now,
right? I had to. Just like when I applied to the state police, which was very competitive at the time, extremely competitive at the time. It's like 2,000 people at least competing for 100 slots.
Wow.
And I did not make it in, quite possibly because I was foolish enough not to put my availability as statewide.
Right. Well, we might not have met if.
Right. That is true. Like, for example, they'll ask you, have you done this? Have you done that? And it's an assortment of crimes.
Right.
You know, as a interview polygraph. And on my one for the New Orleans Police Department, the polygrapher made a mistake. He asked, instead of asking if I ever sold marijuana, he asked me, have you ever stole marijuana?
Well,
do you want to hear my joke answer? I kind of upset the polygrapher, but I gave it.
So how did you reply to what the polygraph examiner asked you?
Well, my joke answer, after I initially said no, before he answered this question, I said, no, man, I'd never take another brother's weed. And
were you quoting something?
Yes, I don't recall which movie, but it was definitely an exploitation movie.
Was it what would they call a black exploitation movie?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. There were several of those, and I had actually seen a few as a child.
I probably did too, because I watched a lot of TV growing up.
Yeah, they were very trendy during the late 60s and early 70s.
Well, in spite of Russo's testimony, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty after less than an hour of deliberation. That's very fast.
That is unusually fast for something that serious.
I'm glad that the jury didn't buy all that stuff. Because when you think about what kind of precedent that would set, you could just prosecute people for political affiliation or even for being gay.
Yes, that's exactly what that would have set up, and it's obvious that that's one of the reasons why he was being prosecuted.
Yeah,
because he was suspected of having nefarious connections because he was from the gay community.
Yes, and Clay Shaw continuously denied having any part of a conspiracy and said of the slain president, "I was a great admirer of Kennedy. I thought he had given the nation a new turn after the rather drab Eisenhower years. I felt he was vitally concerned about social issues, which concerned me also. I thought he had youth, imagination, style, and elan. All in all, I considered him a splendid president." And on August 15th, 1974, Clay Shaw died at the age of 61 at his home from lung cancer. He was buried in Woodlawn Cemetery in Kentwood, Louisiana. At the time of his death, he was engaged in a $5 million lawsuit against Garrison and members of an organization called Truth and Consequences Incorporated that financed Garrison's investigation. As Shaw had no surviving relatives, the United States Supreme Court dismissed the suit in 1978. Then, in 1979, Richard Helms, former director of the CIA, testified under oath that Shaw had been a part-time contact of the Domestic Contact Service branch of the CIA. During that time, Clay Shaw volunteered information from his travels abroad. However, about 150,000 Americans had provided such information to the Domestic Contact Service by the mid-1970s. These contacts were considered cooperative and were not considered secret operatives. Richard Helms also said that such acts of cooperation should not be confused with an actual agency relationship. So that's can you go into a little bit more about this CIA and the Domestic Contact Service branch?
He was simply a CIA consultant.
Okay.
You could also call that a contractor, as of course he was not an employee of the CIA, really. And to this day, the CIA employs consultants and contractors for a variety of things. Now, some of these do fall into the category of someone who you could call an operative, okay, as in like former members of the Special Operations Community who go abroad and do such things like purchase surplus Russian military equipment or even aircraft or missile systems or weapon systems before they fall into the hands of third world countries. Stuff like that has been done, right, for example. But Clay Shaw didn't even remotely fall into that category, and he did not have a security clearance.
No.
So he was just simply a source of information. And keep in mind, Central Intelligence Agency, the biggest thing the Central Intelligence Agency does is gather information.
Right.
And that's all Clay Shaw did for them, as that was Clay Shaw assisted them mainly on matters involving like South and Central America, because that's where he actually had quite a bit of business travels and knowledge of those countries. Of course, we're talking about a time when you couldn't just look this kind of information up on the internet. Some of it you could get from a library. But when you need current information, especially at that time, you had to talk to someone who'd actually been to those countries.
That's right, because you did not have the internet. You did not have Facebook friends who perhaps lived in Canada or Iran or what have you, England. You couldn't just instant message somebody who lived in those countries.
No. And these people, chances are, they're going to be sources of information that you might not be able to get from people working at U.S. embassies in those countries.
Right. So, do you have any more final thoughts, or was that it?
Pretty much it.
Yeah. And
except he was, he got targeted for, you could say, for his geography. As he is located in the city where this conspiracy apparently took place,
right?
Where it was planned, and he was a prominent member of New Orleans society. And obviously, one of the things that connected him to this was, of course, him being considered nefarious, being a member of the gay community. at the time, that would be a mark against him. And he seemed to know someone, simply just know someone who was involved, which can easily happen if you're as prominent as he was at the time and you're located in the same city as this kind of conspiracy takes place, and know just one person.
Exactly. That would be like, oh, okay. So like when we went to Barnes & Noble years ago to meet former President Bill Clinton to go get, it was a book signing, of course, because it's Barnes & Noble. And, you know, I shook his hand. I met him. I talked to him. And then I think it was 2 or 3 days after that, he had, I think it was a heart attack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
His face was red that day, too.
Yes, it was. So it would be like if somebody said, oh, well, Tracy shook his hand at this book signing. She caused his heart attack.
Yeah, she puts, the CIA gave her, put this substance on her hand, gave her this like little sticky thing to put on her hand.
Like from the interview?
Yeah, like from the interview, and then you shake his hand and he gets
sick.
He gets sick from it, you know. So while we're here on that discussion, tell them about what he said.
Okay. So at the time I had this shirt and it said, and I also want to add that this was like June or July and we waited outside all freaking night
6
long.
hours.
It was hot. I felt disgusting. My hair was not having a good day, but I was wearing this shirt that said, I sacked Isengard, and all I got was this lousy t-shirt. And, you know, no matter how awful I looked, I will say he made me feel pretty, not going to lie. He read my shirt, and then he looked me right in the eyes, and he smiled. He said, oh, Lord of the Rings. I love Lord of the Rings. I used to read it to my nephews. I mean, it was actually, look, and no matter how you may or may not feel about the Clintons, this was just a nice moment between me and Bill Clinton. Nothing more, nothing less. And it was a good moment. I'm glad that like my one moment with Bill Clinton was a good one.
Yeah, we saw an example in person of how well he would always connect with people. And even if what he was saying to you would just be some BS he came up with, he knew about what he was BSing about. If he was BSing to you, so he would sound very genuine when he makes this connection with you, even if he just
it's
cooked
that charisma.
It up in his head. Yeah.
It's that charisma. People who have that charisma can get away with a lot.
Yeah, well, charisma is a connection between one person and an audience.
It's like with certain actors and singers and whatnot, celebrities.
And of course, a good part of it is essentially you're telling someone something that they're happy to hear.
That's right.
It is a very big part of it. And so he's definitely someone who could read an audience and read people well. And, you know, reading what was on your shirt,
yes,
you see, was all he needed to make that connection with you. It's a connection he did not make very well with the T-shirt I was wearing that day, which was one of your shirts. It was a shirt with the anarchy symbol on it.
Yes.
And yes, it said anarchy rules, right?
No, I don't think it said that. I think it was just the A with the circle. I think that's all it was. I don't think it actually said anything on it. And
of course, he knew what the shirt meant, and his eyes looked at the shirt first. He said nothing. Then he looked at my face and said nothing. And I'm like thinking, wow, I guess he doesn't like this shirt.
You made him short circuit.
and because maybe he didn't know how to connect with someone with an anarchy shirt, maybe. So, and then I smiled and I said, oh, this is one of my wife's shirts. And he smiled and he said, good for you, sir.
Not that it really matters, but I kind of wonder what he thought about all that. Like, who is he married to? She's wearing an Isengard shirt, and she has an anarchy shirt. Wow.
I don't know if he realized that my wife was in front of me, that he had just talked to my wife.
Okay.
I don't know if he made that connection or not.
Okay, well, either way, I think that's going to wrap it up for today. next week we are going to talk about what queer protections there are in Louisiana. There's not a whole lot, admittedly. We're going to talk about how we got here today, and we're also going to touch upon how very poorly our state laws stack up against some other states. And also some people might be wondering why I chose to open up with Clay Shaw's story today. It is because I did want to provide a snapshot of what life was like for a lot of the gay community in Louisiana at the time. I know that today New Orleans has a reputation for being gay friendly, and that is true, but it wasn't always so. And in fact, it was quite recently that we've only gained that reputation.
Yes, for a very long time, parts of the French Quarter were among the only places in New Orleans where the gay community could safely meet and be themselves.
Yes. And that is why I wanted to talk about this story today. I feel like it's a story that's kind of gotten lost, maybe in history in general.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know that Clay Shaw was gay.
That's right, but he was a gay man, and he was not a coward, and he was not a bad person.
No, there's no such a thing as a coward being awarded the Bronze Star.
What is the Bronze Star awarded for? Did we talk about that?
It is one of the. We didn't talk about that earlier in this broadcast.
Let's go ahead and talk about it.
Okay, the Bronze Star is one of those meritorious type of individual citations that is for bravery and going above and beyond the call of duty. You know, so you have the Bronze Star, and after that you do have the Silver Star.
What's the Silver Star for?
An action that would be even considered braver than what you get for a Bronze Star.
Okay.
They're both along. The Bronze Star and the Silver Star are among the same lines.
Isn't there a Gold Star too?
No.
No, okay.
No, there isn't. There isn't a Gold Star. No.
Okay.
No. And the Medal of Honor is the highest, but obviously the Medal of Honor is higher than the Bronze Star or the Silver Star.
Well, Medal of Honor is the highest, right?
Yes. People call it Congressional Medal of Honor, but that's a misnomer. It's actually the Medal of Honor.
Gotcha. And now everybody who listens to this broadcast will know that. So, for now, dear listeners, I'm flubbing my exit. Dear listeners, be safe, be kind, don't park next to vans.
And if it's dark, if it's dangerous, and you don't feel safe, don't be there in the first place. And if you are questioned by law enforcement, and yes, that's city, state, or federal, and you are not the victim of a crime, or a witness to a crime, lawyer up.